Good evening and welcome to News Now. A local doctor takes us inside the story of Rush Limbaugh and lung cancer. Our Lansing Insider shows us what Republicans and Democrats will fight to the end for in Michigan's new budget proposal. But first, one of Michigan's high-profile Democratic congresswomen has thrown her support to one of the Democrats, and it's not one who was on the stage during Friday night's debate. Michigan Congresswoman Haley Stevens is supporting former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg, giving the billionaire a nice boost in Michigan. Joining us now from the Bloomberg campaign is Sabrina Singh. Sabrina, thanks for being here.
Hey there, thanks for having me today.
So what does that mean for you? That seems like a pretty good shot in the arm to get that endorsement from Congresswoman Stevens.
It was, and we were so excited that Rep. Stevens is on board and endorsed Mike. You know, one of the things that she said is that Mike is going to help grow Michigan's manufacturing economy, and that is exactly what he plans to do. Mike is someone that, our slogan is Mike will get it done, and that's for a reason. As a New York mayor, he grew the economy here. He created more jobs, and that is what we need in the White House. We don't need someone that like this president, giving us false promises and failing to deliver on the jobs that he promised. So we're so excited that Congresswoman Stevens is on board, and I'm looking forward to campaigning with her from now until the end of November.
Can you give us a little behind the scenes how this works? How do the candidates win over endorsements? Do they have meetings, or do they just share their ideas with different people? How does it actually work?
Yeah, well, I think, who endorses you says a lot about who you are, and especially coming from, a community, the values that you believe that person will bring in the White House. And so, I think the conversations kind of happen organically, but, this is a competitive race. There's still so many candidates in this Democratic field. And one of the things that every single one of them is competing for are endorsements from local elected officials, federally elected officials, and beyond. And so, community leaders, activists. And so the fact that we did get Rep. Stevens' endorsement is really huge, especially since we had such a big weekend of action this weekend. I think, part of our campaign this weekend in Michigan was opening up 4 new offices across the country. That's going to help us mobilize voters. We already have 2 offices in Detroit and offices in Ann Arbor, Bloomfield Hills, Warren, and Flint. So, I think these endorsements help us keep that momentum up, keep us in the race, keep our voice relevant. And, when Haley Stevens goes back to her community, she can talk to folks about why she chose to endorse Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah, I kind of think a lot of people do look at people they voted for or people they like, and if they endorse someone, they say, all right, I'll get on board too. The Detroit Free Press was supposed to endorse somebody, but they decided they needed more time. Do you think that opens a door for Mike Bloomberg to get an endorsement from Michigan's largest paper?
Definitely. I think it certainly opens the door. We're not closing any doors. And I think what, I certainly would want people to know about why he should earn the endorsement of one of the biggest newspapers in the state is that he's a proven leader. He has an unmatched track record, not only in government, but in business. He's someone that can unite the Democratic Party, bridge those partisan differences, and really, get a sense of confidence restored in Washington that we're going to get big things done for Americans. So we would certainly welcome the endorsement of the Detroit News and other papers to really highlight why Mike is the best person to defeat Donald Trump in November.
Are you surprised that the paper wasn't able to come up with a decision in its normal time frame?
There's still a lot of candidates in this race. And given I think we were all pretty jarred by what happened in Iowa last week. And, given that New Hampshire is tomorrow, I think it was a good call for the paper to just put things on pause for a minute. We don't really have a clear winner out of Iowa yet because the results have not been completely certified and called by other outlets. Even though I think we have a good idea, there was still a lot of unsettlement there. And so I think it was a good decision for the paper. Look, and as part of Mike's team, I hope that we can really, gain the endorsement of the Detroit News and other papers across the country, because we really need to defeat Donald Trump in November. That is the goal. And so I think when newspapers are so important to informing voters all across the country, it would be fantastic to get their endorsement.
Over the weekend, the Michigan Black Caucus endorsed Joe Biden, which is good for his campaign. He needed a resurgence of sorts after Iowa. Is that a big shot when you miss out on an important endorsement like that?
Like I said earlier, I think any endorsement, especially from leaders within the community, is certainly important. Joe Biden has his own record of getting things done, and he certainly has served so well as the former vice president to Barack Obama. But I mean, look, we're gaining other endorsements. I'm not going to give away any too soon, but we are going to be rolling out some big ones this week. So I think that's great for him, but we have others coming down, and I think people will be excited about those too.
The other candidates are all in New Hampshire, town hall meetings and shaking hands. You guys have pretty much skipped New Hampshire. What was on the agenda this weekend, and why was it more important than New Hampshire?
Well, as you know, Mike only got into the race November 21st, I believe. So to actually lay down an infrastructure in the early states like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, that was just not going to be logistically feasible. You had candidates campaigning in those states since they announced back in January or February of 2019. So we really had to set our sights on the states that are bigger and deliver more delegates, when it comes time to voting. And so our strategy has always been the Super Tuesday states and beyond. And that's why we're investing so much money in the non-early states and really laying an infrastructure in some of the bigger states that we know are going to be so important and so critical to defeating Donald Trump in November. I mean, as you know, Michigan is one of the most important battleground states after Trump, barely won there, but did win by just 10,000 votes in 2016. It's important to get the infrastructure in place so we are ready to defeat him in November in 2020. And that's what Mike is doing. And so we look forward to competing in those states where, most of the Democratic field does not have an infrastructure or a presence. Mike has been there and will continue to be campaigning from now until, he is the nominee.
And real quickly, the president is going to deliver his nearly $5 trillion budget today. Will this be a place where Mike Bloomberg can separate himself from Donald Trump?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think this president has really come in on a lot of false promises, whether it's, saying that he was going to deliver on creating more jobs or growing the economy. I think we can acknowledge that the economy is doing well, but that people are not necessarily feeling that in their paychecks, in their, what they take home at the end of the day. And so what we need to do, and I think what Mike will certainly do, is apply the lessons that he took from being a mayor for 12 years in New York and apply it in the White House. I mean, he is someone that moved New York into creating more jobs, but was able to still reduce the carbon footprint of the city. This is someone that would take on the issue of gun violence, which we know affects all communities across the country. So I think when it comes to the economy, having a mayor, the former mayor of New York City, one of the largest cities in the country, debate Donald Trump on how they're going to grow the economy and other important issues, I'm ready for that debate. We are definitely ready to have that conversation.
All right, Sabrina Singh, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
You bet. We'll be right back with more News Now. It was a stunning announcement on live radio. Conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh announcing he has advanced lung cancer. The host often jokes about his former smoking days in the past, but no one was laughing when the reality set in. Joining us to talk about this is Dr. Tom Rafai. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Kevin.
I had the radio on and was listening to that live, and it really just hit me. Like, wow, the reality setting in when somebody hears the words, you have cancer. I mean, that's got to just change your life.
Absolutely, especially advanced lung cancer. That stage is really inevitably going to take Rush from us in a rather short period of time.
What does that mean when, there's different stages and whatnot, advanced?
Yeah, it means it's spread well beyond his lungs. It's spread well beyond his lungs. It's not surgical. There's nothing surgical that can really be done about it. They could probably mitigate the advancement of the spread as much as possible, but there's not going to be a cure at this level.
He was saying that, hey, I'm going to be off the air some for treatment and maybe because of how I'm feeling
Sure.
after treatment. Is he probably talking about chemo or something like that or something different?
I doubt they're going to give him chemo in the sense that would seem to be more curative, but probably radiation therapy to calm it down, and that could lead to definite side effects that can take you out for a few days afterwards.
So what's that like for people who have to go through this? Does it just completely wipe you out?
If it was chemotherapy, yes. I have a family member that's literally going through this right now, and it's for several days. You are wiped out in terms of energy, in terms of your appetite, obviously the loss of hair. You can lose weight, get dehydrated, but I think in his case it's mostly palliative care. It's not going to be curative with chemo. It's probably going to be radiation that he's going to get to try to at least slow it down.
You know, Rush always has a sense of humor about his smoking days. He'd say, "Let me get my papers in my formerly nicotine-stained hands."
Right.
And I think he always talked about liking to have cigars out on the golf course
Right.
and whatnot. What are the realities of cancer as it relates to smokers?
Clearly, number one cause is going to be cigarette smoking, but cigar smoking and pipe smoking is number two, and then we get to secondhand smoke is three. We don't even get to asbestos as a second cause beyond smoke exposure till number four. So it is a significant reality. Not everyone who smokes is going to get cancer, but remember there are a number of different types of cancer beyond lung cancer, and then of course there's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in terms of COPD, emphysema, so to speak, and a number of other issues from osteoporosis risk, obviously heart attack and stroke risk, early menopause and dementia. So there's a number of risks, but clearly it's something that people derive some type of either pleasure or stress reduction from, or simply get addicted to the nicotine, and it's not easy. Though we've had a marked reduction down to about 15% of Americans now smoking versus much higher, over 20 million, let's say, earlier in this century. So we're making progress. We've still got a long way to go, though.
So if you smoked, say, till you were 25 and then stop, or say smoked till you're 30 or something, and then you stopped, will your body heal itself, or are you kind of stuck with the damage that was already done?
To a large degree, there is a significant amount of healing, particularly on the cardiovascular risk end. Probably within days, your cardiovascular risk starts to drop. In terms of cancer risk, it's probably more out on the realm of 15 years or so before you'd say, you're out of the woods. And now that we have screening tools, there's a low-dose spiral CT that people should be asking about if they are a significant smoker, and that's considered 30-pack years, which means if you've been smoking a pack a day for 30 years, or 2 packs a day for 15, and you can start to do the math, you would have a 30-pack year history. A lot of insurances will cover this low-dose CT scan that has been able to finally detect early, like stage 1, before it becomes symptomatic. Because one of the big learning lessons here is that lung cancer, like some others, but let's say pancreatic cancer, is frequently not symptomatic until it's way advanced. And we see this in Rush's case.
And so would you get a test as well if you were concerned that maybe you have secondhand smoke, if you were a child of a smoker or something like that?
Probably not, because at that point, the risk of having other things found, and then the biopsies that might be required, which have, there's lung biopsy has its own risk, bleeding, collapse your lung. The benefit has to outweigh the risk, and the assessment based on the data we have is that it's at 30-pack years as far as coverage goes. Now, if you and your doctor discuss that you want to have this test and you're willing to pay cash for it, that's a discussion between you and your physician.
So people should stop smoking if they're smoking.
Even cut back. Even cut back. Whether you quit, whether you start to cut back, we have 1-800-QUIT NOW, the American Cancer Society. There's smoking cessation programs at virtually every hospital that you can call about, and there's typically coverage. You can call your benefits on the back of the card, your insurance card, that if you have one, that you can get some help That's really important. And then there are a number of products out there that can be used to help people quit smoking. None are perfect. Each one has to be individualized, and that's why a good assessment with a smoking cessation counselor and a licensed practitioner, whether it be a physician or a nurse practitioner or physician assistant, is really the best route to go.
Some of this vaping was supposed to be a substitute for smoking, and then it became a reason for young people to start in the first place. Do we know what those impacts are going to look like?
Well, this is a great question, and I want to just focus in on one area where I think it can be helpful. Because there's a lot of potential unknowns with vaping we're starting to find out. The vitamin E acetate issue with THC vaping that cause a certain type of lung injury and so forth. But for those people that nothing else is working, whether it's a nicotine patch, whether it's nicotine gum, whether it's the Chantix product, I would say that the benefit would outweigh the risk to find a quality vaping product if you are going to use it to quit, not to concomitantly smoke or just use it when you're in an area that you cannot smoke. Because when we see combination of vaping and smoking, we see a significant increased risk. So it would be as a true quit date, I'm going to now vape and then hopefully wean from that. And anything that can get someone to quit smoking that's reasonable, and I think that that is reasonable to consider.
And exercise isn't going to help with cancer, but it could help with some of the other issues related to smokers.
In terms of exercise, physical exercise, such as cardiovascular risk, of course. I mean, in fact, we see that whether it's a weight or it's smoking, exercise is going to be a mitigating factor for a number of health issues. So why not? And by the way, it might also encourage you, because if you like to exercise and you start finding yourself short of breath, you'll get that breath a little bit back when you quit.
All right, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back with more News Now. The governor's proposed budget is in. Will it get passed? Will it look anything like it currently does? Joining us now to talk about it is political consultant Adrian Heeman. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Thanks for being here.
You bet.
So you've seen this happen a lot. You've followed this kind of thing closely.
Yeah.
Is it always the same, or is it different depending on who the players are and who's in power?
Well, it's always going to be different when you have a different governor. The governor proposes and the legislature disposes is the old turn of phrase. And so you have a different governor. She's going to propose different things. And there is some new stuff in the budget. Whether any of that becomes law is a very open question. We won't know that until spring at the earliest.
So the general public, I think, has a feeling or a sense that the governor ran on fixing the roads, and that was going to be the priority. And then she got elected, and she got up there, and she found a legislature that was not going to give a lot on a lot of specific items.
That's right.
And now it's a year later. What is anything different? Did she present a budget that might pass through easier, or did she present a budget that's going to be, sorry, this is not what it's going to look like when we're done?
There's going to be tough fighting over the budget. There always is tough fighting over the budget. I think that'll be no different this year. Some of the things that you look for fighting about, there'll be additional fighting about the roads, notwithstanding the governor's bonding proposal, which was just put through the State Transportation Commission. You're going to see a lot of fighting about the roads because of what roads are being funded with that $3.5 billion of bond money. They're all state trunk lines and interstates. They're almost all in Southeast Michigan and Mid-Michigan. And there's not a whole lot that's on that list north of Lansing, and there are no county and local roads on that list. And so I think you'll see the Republican lawmakers fighting pretty hard to fund some local roads, probably at the expense of some of the other things, like the paid family leave proposal that the governor has in her budget.
Politically speaking, at the end of the day, do both parties need to kind of get the roads fixed? I mean, because Republican lawmakers who are in, if they're obstructing the roads getting fixed, they could be blamed. If the governor isn't able to fulfill on her promise, she could be blamed.
I think the governor actually did a really smart thing politically with this bonding proposal for the roads, because it's going to address state trunk lines and interstates, the most traveled roads in the state, in the most populated parts of the state. From a purely political perspective, that makes a ton of sense. The lawmakers' districts that are getting shortest shrift in that bonding proposal are Republicans. And so I think the Republicans now have, they're not happy about this, obviously, but they've got an incentive to come to the table and have some conversation about roads because, voters in the areas of the state that support the governor the most, where the most Democrats live, some of their roads are going to get fixed.
Do people think the next time around when an election comes back, oh, wait, we borrowed that money, now we're paying interest on it. Maybe that wasn't the best way to do it. Maybe we should have taken money from somewhere else. Or do they just kind of say, are my roads better than they were 4 years ago?
I think the latter, and from the perspective of legislative Republicans, if they want people to think the former, they've got a lot of work to do from a communications and messaging perspective. The next gubernatorial election, politically speaking, is an eternity away.
Yeah.
We haven't even done the presidential primary yet, let alone the general election this year. So that's politically, politically an eternity away, and most voters are not going to be thinking about where did the money come from. Are the roads that I'm driving on any good or not?
The roads are only one piece of the puzzle. There's so many things that are important to people in Michigan. Let's talk about some of the places that the governor highlighted in this budget.
Sure. Well, the governor did a partial restoration of Pure Michigan funding in this budget. I know something that a lot of folks in the travel and tourism, the restaurant industry were advocating very hard for. Still hasn't restored the funding in the current year budget, but it's in her budget proposal at a lesser amount for next year. There's the paid family leave piece for state employees. That's not a huge ticket budget item in the grand scheme of an almost $50 billion budget. It's about $10 million, but I expect there'll be some hard fighting about that. So, I mean, there are some new policy proposals in here. Most of the time when you see big new policy proposals in a divided government scenario, they're a negotiating tactic, and I think that's a lot of what you're seeing here.
Let's talk a little bit about Pure Michigan. Tourism is huge in Michigan, right? And people seem to like Pure Michigan. They recognize it, and they think it's great to invite people in. Do you think that the sales tax might be something that people can talk about? You go to Florida or New York, and it seems like they really hit visitors hard. Are there any additional taxes that can be placed on tourists since tourism is so big in Michigan, or is it just a fight that can't get agreed on?
Well, and you see some of that with, some of the taxes on lodging, for instance, that end up getting put into the tourism industry. You have to be careful with that. Michigan's not a place that you end up in on accident. Obviously, it's great when people in Michigan choose to take their vacations in Michigan, but if we want to keep getting that tourist dollar from outside the state, we've got to draw people here. It's not on the way anywhere but Canada. And so, I'd be skeptical of getting too far into the weeds trying to raise taxes on tourists. I think you can do some of that around the margins. Typically, that's done by local governments, county governments, more than it is by the state.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the paid family leave. Why is that so important to the governor?
Well, I think number one, the governor was a working mom. She had two children sort of in the prime of her career. And so I think she's very empathetic to people that maybe didn't have some of the advantages in being able to take care of young children that she did. And also, I think that the governor has gotten a lot of feedback from state employees about this, that it's a real barrier to progress for them. And look, it's good for families. It's good for young children to be able to spend time with their parents when they're first born. So I think that that's really what's motivating this. And I also think from her perspective, it's very, very smart politics in an election year where, the voting behavior of women is going to be super important politically for Michigan.
So when you have an idea that sounds good for everybody, how do you address the issues of what's it going to cost, and is there enough money to go around for everything, and can we do what is good or nice for people? Can we afford to?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question. That's always going to be the debate is, how much is the right amount to spend and where's the money going to come from? As it stands right now, there's not a whole lot in terms of tax and fee increases in the governor's budget. There's some. There always is some. There was plenty under Governor Snyder, too. But, you're not seeing huge revenue increases being proposed by the administration this time. So I think that, really we're going to be arguing around the margins about where does that last $10 to $15 million, $50 million go. And again, out of a $50 billion budget, it's a relatively small amount, even though it doesn't sound like it to you or I.
So how close will the proposed budget look to the finalized budget?
Not very close. And I think that that's typical. I mean, at least in terms of the general fund items. The budget actually looks very similar every year because of that $50 billion. Only about 9 to 10 of it is general fund money. Most of it's restricted money or, federal money that we get, with matching funds, whether that's for Medicaid or for state highways. So the biggest parts of the budget look the same every year, but the new stuff, that never looks the same at the end of the process.
All right. Will you keep following it for us and come back?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. That's our show for tonight. Please look for us on Facebook at News Now with Kevin Dietz. For everyone from News Now, I'm Kevin Dietz. Good night.